I'm going to talk about the long-term rural vision, which of course comprises all aspects of what we do in rural areas, all policies and others. This is indeed a holistic vision that was approved by the Commission as a form of a communication in June, and is now making its way through different institutions and stakeholders, and implementation that has just been started and is going on. Let me just present my screen so you can have an idea of what this is about. Let me see where I have this here. I'm trying to find it. Difficult at the moment. Just bear with me a second that I find it here in the in my own. It's very seems that I cannot see it here in. Let me see. Okay, now we are here. Okay. I hope. Can you see this now? I hope.
Yeah, yes.
Good. Let's start with. Let me see. So, what is this vision actually about? The first thing is what it's not about. It is not a. You have just presented the CAP and biodiversity strategies and other of these programs. The vision is not competing with any of them. It actually, the idea of the vision is that it pulls together all of these different strands, what we do for rural areas in the EU, and then hopefully in the next stage also on the member state levels. The vision had started with a constatation that there is a lot of disaffection in rural areas. There are many things that policies do, but these policies don't always pull together in the right way. So we were lacking a vision for the long term of what all of these enormous changes happening would specifically mean for rural areas. And also what all of the policies are doing for rural areas. So we actually needed a comprehensive view on rural areas, and also some actions to make this comprehensive view better implemented, and to open up the road for 2040. And it sounds very fancy, of course, but we need both something we do now, and we need a well-funded and well-defined plan for the future. One of the major things is that this is a vision that tries to encompass approaches from all policies. You mentioned many of those: biodiversity strategies, farm to fork, Green Deal. It's indeed a huge number, and from this huge number is also translated into policies, social, economic, others. Not only the funding from different funds in Europe, and they also their national counterparts. And what made this, when the vision was planned, of course, we're not in this pandemic situation, but it has the pandemic situation has shown that this vision and a fresh and comprehensive look on rural areas is even more necessary. We, of course, needed an analysis to do this. We needed a foresight exercise. The foresight exercise identified the drivers, what we are supposed to do with rural areas, what makes them tick, what makes them different. And then, as I said, an action plan for us to see what we actually should start doing now, and what are we already doing, and what could we do better. And this is not a vision from Brussels. This is a vision from all stakeholders too. There's a very massive stakeholder engagement in public consultation, roadmap, Rural Vision Week, with a big number of stakeholder initiatives as well. And then all of this was flanked, and the ideas we had put forward were flanked by a Eurobarometer study, and it all boiled basically down to much the same drivers and much the same idea. So this is something that we think is carried by the stakeholders and European population as a whole. But now, a brief look of what we have here in these papers. There's also we have everything on our website. There is a communication, and then what is important for all, especially for the academic community, but also for all of the policymakers, is the rather huge staff working document, analyzing policies, analyzing the rural situation, and almost 200 pages. It was indeed a huge work to put together, and then the usual synopses and fact sheets. And I mentioned that we were pretty much in agreement with the stakeholders and others on what we should do in rural areas. We identified several different challenges on which I think that the demographic there's the rural areas in most parts, of course, closer to cities. It is usually a better situation, but they are depopulating, they are aging. At the same time, they need people for this for the aging population. And of course, I mean, this is this produces very often a negative spiral. This negative spiral then enhances itself. So the already limited access to low connectivity, feeling of overlooked, gets worse, and even and the resilience, which was in many areas not always very good in the beginning, is even more limited. And we are talking about a huge part of European land. It's most of the European land by far, of course, and even a big chunk of population, not in proportion, but it is a big chunk. And it's also a very diverse area. There is some parts are closer to cities, and these usually fare better. And in terms of economic and social conditions, not necessarily in terms of natural landscape. Here we have, if we want to differentiate, a much bigger challenge than the less populated areas. Even though the less populated then have a different issues of with the landscape, biodiversity, and other environmental stewardships. But here you see that we do not have any possibility of one solution fits all approach in this vision. And this is, of course, I mean, it may look rather monolithic when you read this vision, but you always have to see that the solutions are very much bottom up and have to then be everything we propose here, the approaches and problems have to be seen in a local context. Now, just demographic trends. I already mentioned these. You can see it on the map that they concentrate on certain areas in Europe. In some areas, they look much better, very much at the far eastern and far western parts of Europe, where we see population shrinkage, and also certain areas, even my own country, Finland. I mean, it is a very clear divide within the country itself. What is happening? Something we have in Finland tried to already address for many years, but so far the successes are not always very good. Then very shortly on our engagement between the rural people and stakeholders. You can see that here in remote rural areas, many people felt left behind. And there is a big part, mostly around the cities, that didn't leave behind in this society, that there's less problems. So this is something that we, of course, need to consider in our policy approach. And then again, what were the main problems that people identified? economic opportunities, infrastructure, and services. I must say that perhaps this is typical for rural areas. We did not deterioration of nature and environment or these types of biodiversity. Biodiversity did come strongly out, but otherwise, I think that most respondents really emphasize the economic and social conditions of these areas. It all seems very bleak in rural areas, but this is certainly not true. We today already spoke about the Green Deal. We spoke about Farm to Fork. It is all something that can only be achieved with ecosystem services, bio and circular economy, and of course as a framework of an ecological and digital transition. Ecological because we need the renewables, we need the bioeconomy materials, we need the biodiversity and the services that only rural areas only can provide in reality. We do not find these in Rue de la Loi in Brussels. This is it's not about a park. These, of course, are a result of the increasing demands from society. We rely on different things than we relied before, and rural areas are, in many cases, best placed to provide them. But there is a big problem that we see, and it is that the rural areas can be reduced only to providers of raw materials and for others, and do not reap the benefits of this ecological transition if we are not careful about how we deal with the social economic drivers in these areas. And then, of course, I must mention that it's almost a mantra now in these discussions, the COVID-19 recovery. This, I think, has made rural areas more active, and of course has made many people realize what sort of resources they have in their own rural areas. And also with the digital transition, can consider actually moving to these areas and enforcing their population. So this is a mixed picture for rural areas with both of the problems and opportunities, a big package for all of us to deal with. And how do we intend to deal with? Sorry, I go a little bit too fast. We identified four main drivers in our so-called foresight exercise. That was also a result of a big engagement with the scientific community and stakeholders. We strongly suggest that rural areas need to be made stronger, better connected, better empowered. So it's connections, empowerment, economic prosperity, but also, and this is, of course, for today's discussion, extremely important, resilient in terms of climate change, economic and social. All of these need to be looked at together. Otherwise, we will risk of missing one part, and then this whole ecosystem of drivers will collapse for rural areas. This is, of course, for cities as well, but here we have very specific drivers. So what do we want to do about it? There is a so-called rural action plan that has been put into place. This means that we have identified flagships. Flagships are big actions, constitution of other several different actions that address these drivers that we have noticed. Or you see here a long list. There's also 15 other accompanying actions, and they encompass all of these areas. For today's conference, I think that I would really like to emphasize our innovation funding driven missions for soil health and food, also the peatland activity. This is also this is all related to the identified problems of depleting biomass and the emerging knowledge of climate effects of different types of land and farming. And obviously also the energy issue, the renewables, how to use them both in rural context and how to provide them for others. This of course in the accompanying action stage that there are many other things that have to do with local action plans that have to do with the rural environment in general. So this is really this chunk here, this piece of a cake is really one of the biggest ones. Also, of course, realizing that it is still, even if we talk about diversification, it is still farming and the materials and services and structure that it provides that is in most rural areas the key to their success, and the fact that they can provide these ecosystem services that we want them to. Then how do we then construct the, let's say, framework for all of this is happening? We of course need to look closely at our own policies, and this is why we introduced something that we would call rural profile. All of the major initiatives will be looked at in the Commission to see how they affect rural areas and if they should be made better in this regard. We also need much better data. Any one of us who reads the staff working document we did will notice that this document there are gaps in the data. There are gaps in this document. These gaps are not necessarily due to the fact that we didn't look at it. We did not have data on rural level, on that level, so that we could have said that, okay, this is it for rural areas, this is the problem, this is what is happening. Very often we had so-called territorial data only, and this mixed rural areas and cities and did not give us the picture we wanted. I already mentioned the fact that all policies need to work together, and we need to also make this true for our stakeholders, those who actually do the work. And this is why we need a combination of EU funds. We need a toolkit. We will also link this with a whole platform, which we call the Rural Revitalization Platform. And this all will give we hope, a much better picture for stakeholders about what the others are doing, what can I do, and how can I fund what I want to do. And then last but not least, what do we do then with the other actors? We have member states, of course, we have stakeholders, regions. For these, we have devised a completely new approach, which we have called the Rural Pact. I'm not talking here about some sort of a fancy commitment with many words, which people would sign. No, this is a framework in which all of these actions are called together. Commission will facilitate it. They are all called together to discuss the issue, to see with a list of objectives that we have provided in this communication, see what they can make out of these objectives together, how they can take all of this process to their own level in their own national, regional, local funding, programming, and other approaches. This is for us an extremely and essential part of the package, because without this we will not be able to realize this. This will very easily stay a paper on Brussels, so lots of actions, lots of others, but not where we would like this to be. Then I must start concluding. Let's have a look at what we do on the level of my DG in particular, and also on other DGs. It is as I said, coordinated EU funding is essential to realize what we want to realize. The CAP contribution is key. We we have already seen it today. I mean, how much it has for environment, landscapes, all of this, the Green Deal part. But obviously, it cannot be all of it. There are others as well, and especially the cohesion funds and also other funding, which we cannot really discuss here. It would take too long. This is something that will shape the rural areas and give the social and economic enablers to continue our work on the Green Deal. Because obviously, we only work on the environment, and there is no one to realize our ambition in rural areas if they're just depopulating. Then I do not think that we can achieve our goals. But nevertheless, the key role is still in the CAP plans. Key role is in the agricultural community in many of these objectives that we have set ourselves. And as you know, the program negotiations are ongoing at the moment for the CAP plans. For the cohesion plans, they are much further. So there we are already in some cases finishing the negotiations. And what we want to do is that we want to put all of these ambition, all of these drivers and objectives that I mentioned here into use in this programming. Then on what is happening now, what's next? This is I mentioned the Rural Pact. There's going to be a conference next year. Don't exactly know when, probably May, June. And also the CAP plans are going to be negotiated, and many of the flagships and actions I mentioned are going to be started. Then an important milestone, or two of them in 23, the rural observatories plan to start. Then we will have we hope, a much better knowledge basis on which to take this process further. And then we also take a closer look on now the coming programming period of what we have already done, how are the plans, do these plans that we have both for cohesion and CAP, do they actually go towards realizing what we want to realize in the rural? And then 1 year after, it's time for reflections that are already beyond this. We need to start early because even though we haven't started this programming period now for EU funding, the next programming period is already being planned and looked at. So, these are the main elements, or some of the main elements that we will be looking at in the future. So I stop here. This was a general presentation of what the rural vision is about, and I will be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.